I'll shortly pass you over to Astro Agency, who will introduce the workshop and the team. Before I do that, I'm sure most of you will have noticed that there are a significant number of new faces on today's session. We are really excited that the Explore programme will be starting shortly. And as part of the support to the entrepreneurs on the programme, today's session, which is designed with the Leo cohort in mind, has been the invite has been extended to the Explore entrepreneurs because much of the content is extremely beneficial to them as well as yourselves on the Leo cohorts. So a big welcome to any of the new faces that are here today. Any questions during the session can be raised. If you just want to raise your hand, we can answer any questions at any time, or feel free to place any questions in the chat. So what I'll do now, without further ado, is hand over to Astro Agency to start off today's session.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am just going to start sharing my screen. My apologies, because once I share my screen, I will not be able to see anyone. So if I'm just looking for a little bit of direction to make sure that the right screen is showing. If somebody can just give me.
Yeah, all good.
All good. Excellent. So my name is Hussein Bukhari. I am a member of the Astro Agency team. Along with me are Ben Smith and Richard Osborne, and who are part of the Astro Agency team, along with Matthias Widmar from University of Edinburgh, who will be our guides this morning. So Astro Agency, a little bit. Is it moving? No, it's not. I will pass it over to Ben if he's around. Ben, can you hear me? On a little introduction on Astro Agency.
Good morning. Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Hussein. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to Entrepreneurial Spark for helping to organise this workshop. So Astro Agency, we've been going for about 2 years. We've got 25 members of staff across the UK and Europe. We've got a wide range of clients, both in the commercial sector and public sector in the UK, Europe and North America. And what makes us a little bit different is that we're totally dedicated to the space sector. And we're set up with 2 divisions. So we have a technology team with real experience of building rockets and satellites and PhDs and doctorates in data and AI, and a real understanding of how space, are the building blocks for the modern economies of the world. And then we have a marketing team as well that deliver strategic brand support and marketing strategies to help drive forward businesses in the space sector. And we're delighted to have partnered with Matt Vidmar on these workshops and to be working with the UK Space Agency. And I hope that gives you a little bit of background about Astro Agency. And yeah, so these are some of the core areas that we work across. So within the technology team, there's the market analysis, technology insights, business consulting, investment and funding, absolutely key to a lot of research and development that goes on in the space sector. And our network is one of the most important things to our business. And then on the marketing side, brand strategy, digital engagement, it can be a little bit fickle, but I'm afraid we all need to do it. Social media, public relations, evaluation, and public affairs. There's a lot of stakeholders in the space sector, and those relationships, as you grow your business, are really, really important.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that, Ben. Really, really great insights into Astro Agency and what we're able to do across the value chain. So moving on to this morning's agenda and a little bit about your guides. So Matt Vidmar and Richard Osborne will be your guides this morning, walking you through the topic of the day, which is market prioritization. Matt is a lecturer in engineering management at University of Edinburgh. And his research has been mostly focused towards new product development, intermediation, innovation networks, entrepreneurship, and future design. Very particularly working in satellite and space data industry, along with artificial intelligence. He's a lecturer and a mentor for students in technology and entrepreneurship, history and sociology of innovation, and future designs and systems. So least to say that he's definitely well equipped to talk about market prioritization, and we're very happy to have him with us and partner with him on this. Richard Osborne is the CTO, a long seasoned veteran in the space industry. He's now the CTO at Astro Agency, and has previously been a program manager for a small launch company and worked on launch systems and propulsion, along with reaction engines, airborne engineering, Raptor, and other numerous players in the industry. He's very, very well versed and specialized in launcher and propulsion technology, trajectory analysis, spaceport analysis, and is now strategically helping Astro Agency get to the next level. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to your guides this morning, Matt Vidmar and Richard Osborne. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hussein, and thank you very much to Entrepreneurial Spark for your introduction as well. And we're delighted to be here this morning. We have quite a packed program. We've only got about an hour left and quite a lot of things to do, so I won't dial about too much. But the plan is to spend next 15 to 20 minutes looking over some of the key conceptual reasons as to how market prioritization is done, sort of ways in which both in theory and in practice we think about markets and why that work is important. And then we'll go to a couple of exercises. Some of the tools that we'll be introducing today might be familiar to you. We've tried to select a few that perhaps you have not used before. And it's very likely that even though you might see some of the things that you already recognize, the way they'll be applied today is perhaps a little bit different than you might have applied them in the past. And as I'm sure you'll be appreciating, there is a variety of experience on this cohort. So please bear with us if you think that something's a little bit too easy for you, but we hope that the way that we build towards the exercises, there'll be something new and something challenging and interesting for everyone. So if we jump right in, so we move to the next slide. So what is the market? What is the space market in particular? You know, there's the first question we were asked was, okay, so what is a space market definition? And my personal answer to that is that there is no proper definition of space market. Different people or different organizations, or indeed at different reports or different sort of analytical points, people will offer different kinds of definitions. Some of you might be familiar with things like health and size of the UK space market or space economy, a series of reports commissioned by first the UK government, then the UK Space Agency on understanding the market in the space industry. And that's probably the most comprehensive view of the space market, which basically encompasses every kind of activity that has a direct link to space assets. But there are different ways in which you can actually make these sort of slightly nebulous, slightly big definitions that make a lot of sense to analysts like myself, but not perhaps as much if you're a company. So what does that actually mean? That, you know, is my business like linked to space asset? Yes. How is it helpful? Well, that's a different question. So rather than actually thinking about the space market as a whole, I think the important thing to kind of get across today and to think about is the way it breaks down and the way it's structured. And there's three main ways in which we would structure something like a technology market. One, of course, is something that you're probably again all very familiar with, which is segmentation to do with sort of value chain. So you can have the upstream, midstream, and downstream. I mean, people might argue exactly what goes into midstream, or if there is a midstream or not. But that's we can have that discussion later if anybody particularly likes. But for the sake of brevity and expeditiousness, we'll just kind of plow ahead. But in space terms, The upstream is usually reserved across all development of hardware. So this is both in terms of launch systems, payloads, payload platforms, sensors, and all equipment that's effectively involved in the actual space infrastructure, both in orbit and in space, as well as here on Earth. Then we have midstream, which is sort of, as I say, there's a bit of contention there. A lot of the sort of space operations, both in terms of operating assets in space, as well as the downlink of data, and the raw data kind of collection, gathering, and storage and things like that are often grouped as some of the intermediate step there at the midstream point of the market. And then of course downstream is where data is being analyzed, and there's data applications arising. Of course, this excludes one bit of the space industry. I don't know if anybody here works in human space flight. That's the bit which operates slightly differently from this, but vast majority of the space sector works in this particular way. So that's one way to look at it. This is the sort of the way that you can break down technologically how the market is structured, and you need to already start thinking about where you are on that value chain, and who are people immediately before you and immediately following, or indeed if you're the end of the value chain, where if you're downstream data applications, then of course who are your customers. The other option is, so you can look across geographically. So in the UK we have several sort of, we don't officially call them space regions. We're now starting to formulate space clusters in these places. Probably the most sort of well-known kind of space centers are around London, from Surrey in the southwest, around towards sort of Oxfordshire and Harwell very famously, Stevenage on the other side, northeast, and then a little bit further afield, of course, Leicester. But there's other areas of emerging activity. I mean, Scotland, where Astro Agency as well as myself are based, is one such big area of new activity, as well as Wales, Cornwall, and of course there's other places all around UK where there are both space companies as well as pockets of expertise. But these are the big centres, and often enough, if you want to cut through into the UK space market, one way or another, you'll have to interact with these sort of larger centres that have been established over the years. Now, if we go further afield, of course, in Europe, the big sort of space countries are Germany and France, but there are also other slightly more niche players like Luxembourg, for instance. I'm sure you've heard of Luxembourg space program before, particularly because of its relatively extensive sort of investment strategy and pulling people in together, as well as others like Scandinavia. Particularly in Sweden, there's quite a big sort of space industry around some of their small launch capability, as well as sort of data downlinking, etc. So there are players on the sort of periphery. Of course, there's all other big European countries have a stake in the space industry. Not to say that they don't, but perhaps from our geostrategic positioning in the UK, Germany, France, Luxembourg, and some of the Scandinavian countries are probably the most immediate partners for our industry. I also put Russia there because we often tend to forget that Russia has a big space industry, of course, been there since the very early days of space programs, and that it has a fast modernizing space industry with emerging sort of space parks and entrepreneurial opportunities as well. I mean, doing business with Russia is difficult for obvious reasons. I don't think we need to go into that. But it's not something to be completely discounted, and they do interface with the European space industry far more than many of the other sort of international centers of space development. Then we have, of course, the US. Not too much to say about the US. The places that you need to pay attention to, of course, are California, with all particular new space newcomers, Florida Space Coast, where it's more about PR really than. I mean, there are some relevant firms perhaps located around Florida Space Coast, but less so than elsewhere, and Colorado, and of course all the other places, usual candidates like DC. Again, depending on where you are in the space value chain, you might find these are more or less useful for your business. But Boulder, Colorado in particular, has a huge sort of space infrastructure and research infrastructure there. And there's Utah as well, and other places. So, but that's kind of often sort of the lay of the land for the US. And then, of course, moving further afield, the next big space places are various places in Asia. Of course, Japan's long-standing space exploration program, Korean Space Agency and their activities, again, expanding on the entrepreneurial side of the program. Of course, China and India, but there are a bit more state-centered and more based around large corporations. But again, there are newcomers breaking through. And then, there's, three dots, right? Particular interest to the UK companies in the recent years has been, for instance, the Middle East. UAE in particular have a massive ambition in the space industry, and they're looking both for opportunities to collaborate as well as sort of invest. Again, probably I'm not telling you anything that you haven't heard before, but that's another way to position you in the market. And of course, the more further afield you go from the UK, the more the market conditions will change. I've mentioned some of the sort of state control and just the way that some of the markets are structured already. But even if you don't interface necessarily with that, there are rules and regulations. For instance, working with the US, we know is sometimes difficult because of their export regulations to do with sort of a lot of the space technology, because it's classified as having potential defense and security implications. And so you need to understand geographically where we are located and where potential customers are. Now, speaking of customers, the other critical way in which you need to understand where your market is who you're actually selling your technology to. There are three general ways in which we can do that. I mean, there's others, but for space industry, there's three relevant ones. So first of all is B2B. Vast majority of space industry transactions are actually internal, are within the space industry itself. We have an increasing footprint in other sectors, but vast majority of that is sort of inward facing. So there's a lot of electronics that's been bought in, there's a lot of optical stuff that's been bought in, there's a lot of data services that's been bought in, but it's less likely that space technology is being exported to other sectors easily. So vast majority of business-to-business transactions are within the space industry. Now, vast majority of the money for space industry comes from governments. And the reason for that is because vast majority of the space data applications, particularly the kind of the level of sort of environmental monitoring and Earth observation, or the broader sort of remote sensing Earth observation, will effectively find its sort of public good as the sort of framework under which it operates. And that basically means that a lot of the money, or most of the money, is actually made by sales to government through security intelligence, as I said, environmental monitoring in particular. And then finally, there is a growing cluster of activity that is directed towards end customers. Now, these customers are primarily directly to customers rather than sort of other businesses. This will primarily be in sort of educational realm, or indeed sort of entertainment industries. Otherwise, space industry usually feeds into intermediaries, and of course, the most money commercially has ever been made is through satellite broadcasting. So satellite TV, effectively, which is now going a bit out of fashion, was a big thing in the 80s and the 90s, and has effectively constituted a lot of the space market in the UK over the past 40 years, particularly through one company called BSkyB. So that's a little bit of an overview, and it's important to give you all these sort of keywords and kind of keep that all in mind as we go through the rest of today's presentation throughout the LEO program, and keep sense checking yourself as to how do you position both yourselves at the moment as well as your ambition with respect to these ideas that there's the value chain segmentation, what is the regional layout, and what are the customer types. I'll pass you on to Richard now to give you some tips as to the kind of questions you need to ask yourself around this view of the market in order to actually helping answering some questions for your market prioritization.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks to everyone for turning up as well, and to Entrepreneurial Spark for this morning. Okay, defining market legitimacy sounds a little bit ominous. It's not. However, it is the one area that we see consistently that people fail to do. And it's absolutely key if you want to make a success in the space industry. what does it mean in terms of defining legitimacy frameworks? Well, it's a very, very sort of posh way of saying you're doing due diligence, essentially. You're looking at what exists in the market, and as you can see from the points that we're about to cover, you cover a number of key factors that will bring you further success, essentially. The most important one of these is, does the market actually exist? Is it genuine? I'll give you an example of this because it's an area I know well, which is launch. And we know, for instance, that there's a large market for launch. But what is often missed is the size of the market. People will often say that the market is huge, it's very rosy, look at all these satellites that need launching. However, a lot of the satellites are going up on specific launchers. So that reduces the size of the market. So that's what we mean by saying genuine market in that context. It's the same for satellites. Within a specific market, the size of the market depends on how many market players are there, what technology you're bringing to the market, and therefore that defines how genuine it is. Is it a single customer? Now that's a really, really important point, and another one we see often, that a company will set up, they'll have one customer in mind, or they'll have one customer from the start. And that can be very successful sometimes, and we've seen space companies essentially work for a decade or more with one customer. But what happens if that one customer then either goes out of business or pivots to a different industry, or just decides to go elsewhere? That's why it's very, very dangerous to define your market based on a single customer. So you need to look further afield to a wider market. Similarly, in terms of the prospects for the market, it's really, really important, I can't emphasize this enough, to check out the financials of that market in terms of the market size, in terms of the market players, in terms of your position within that market over the long term. That's something that again, it frequently comes up because a lot of companies are established in the space world on what can be very project-based developments. And that tends to underemphasize the importance of looking at the long term. And it is an area that if you plan for the long term from the outset and build that into your value proposition, it tends to stand you in much better stead. The risk reward potential. This is a classic area that needs to be defined when you're initially setting up. We see it again, the launch market's a classic example. You have lots of very keen people coming into the launch market and thinking they're going to be driving around in Bentleys within a couple of years. But the reality is that the margins are not always as rosy as they may seem. And this is the same across the entire space market. You need to be clear on what your risk reward potential is from the outset to avoid pain further on. And this is a question for everyone here. How many of you actually have someone dedicated to observing and analyzing the market? Is anyone going to put hands up, or?
I can see some hands up, but
We can see a few hands up.
Answer in the chat.
count. Oh, there is one hand up.
One
Okay,
hand
one
up.
hand up.
Right. Well, it's important then that I asked this question.
Two now. Well,
Yeah,
people are waking up slowly. That's good. That's good. We haven't lost them yet.
I've not sent them all to sleep. Good. No, it is really important to keep track on what the market's doing. It's easy for me to say because that's pretty much what my job is, along with Ben, who's also on this call. You know, we are tracking and observing what's happening and analyzing it all the time. But it is something that I've seen in several space companies in the past, that they do look at either tracking that market continually or calling in outside help to tell them what's actually going on in the market, and advising on who they should be keeping an eye out on. It's really important to keep a track. It's another area we often see companies coming in and they haven't actually got this handle on the market in terms of who's out there. They don't know who their competitors are. So it's really, really important. On that, I'll hand back over to Matt, if that's okay, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Because otherwise I could go on.
I know you can. I know you can. And we're already running a little late. So I'm sure. Thank you so much. So yeah, so the what is Richard just sort of highlighted at the end is that, you know, the idea that you need to track your market kind of goes from, you know, stems from a long-standing research in sort of understanding markets and sociology of markets, and the fact that markets are extremely changeable, right? And what you kind of have to keep doing is you have to keep performing still calculation. There's some very famous literature. If anybody's that interested, I can show you some of this stuff. But there's some very famous literature around markets as sort of calculated devices, the way in which we determine value through interaction, through abstracting what goods and services that are being offered into the market are, and then try and reconfigure how they fit as circumstances change. And that's why it's so important that you kind of have to, you know, do two things, right? One is evaluating, which is sort of trying to benchmark what, you know, what your current position in the market is, what other competitors in particular position in the markets are, but also valuing, recalculating the value that the markets actually place on your products. There's a little video here, which is quite famous. I'll share the link. We don't have time to actually watch it, but I'll share the link here. It's all available on YouTube. And I saw there's in the comments that somebody is looking for some reference literature. I'll try and compile something and put either here in the chat later when we do the exercises, okay? Because it'll take me a few minutes to actually pull these things together. But anyways, the video is very famous. It's a Harvard professor who goes and explains the way you need to approach that sort of evaluation and valuing of what your product is doing. Evaluation is the process of actually trying to benchmark where you are. But the first thing you need to figure out is where the value is in this market and what people value in it. And so this little example there is about milkshakes. It's about, you know, actually, what is the job? What is really the job that your product is doing, or service? Doesn't matter. It's the same thing pretty much. If we go to the next slide, there's a very famous tool to try and help you map that, and that is to do with something called the value proposition canvas. So the value proposition canvas is really straightforward. It's you know, I said it's calculation, right? You have one side of your equation side and the other side of the equation side. And what you need to actually figure out is what the jobs are your customers doing, what are the pains that they are suffering, and what are potential gains that they would be looking for, right? So this is effectively their needs and wants, right? So the pains are the needs, things, you know, the things that are really bad and they'd like to kind of improve upon, and things that are, you know, where the opportunities seem to be, right? So that's your customer side of things. And then you can figure out how you can address that by listing features of your products and services and try to map them as to how they relieve pain and how they create gain. I mean, I'm sure most of you have seen value proposition canvases before. If not, again, another couple of references that we can happily provide in the chat. But the value proposition canvas is basically a way to capturing the value as you evaluate your market. And you know, and of course, the idea is that, you know, the more closely your pain relievers relieve the pains and your gain creators offer your customers gains, the more likely you are to be successful. And you can do the same sort of mapping. Once you understand your customer profile, you can do the same sort of mapping with your competitors. You can do the same sort of mapping with, you know, potential emerging technologies. You're trying to make decisions, which kind of technology direction, you know, this is all about market prioritization. So if you want to prioritize one direction to go down as opposed to another, the way to do it is to try and map how does particular new feature or new R&D direction correspond to what your customers actually are looking for. And then, of course, super important when you do that is to understand not only how you can create products that map to your customers, but also who and where your customers are. And for doing that, you have two tricks in the arsenal of business development, and those are market segmentation and product differentiation, which are on the next slide. So market segmentation is effectively a way to break down a potential demand market into tangible places where you can offer your products to see if they'll work or not. Market segmentation is basically breaking your customers into groups from, you know, people who are technology purchasers, or, you know, if you talk about, you know, space data, you know, there's a satellite broadcasting market, there's a telecoms market, there's an Earth observation market. Then you break it further. If you're going to the Earth observation market, you go from sea monitoring, land monitoring, and you can break down customers until you get to a point where they are homogeneous enough that you are able to write on one sheet of paper, if possible, everything, you know, who these people are, as, you know, what is the common denominator across the whole of that market segment. That's a rule of thumb. I mean, you can do more. There are more sophisticated ways in which you can kind of break down the markets. There's even some formula involved, which I know pleases Richard to no extent. But there's actually, in the simplest way you can do this is you can try and work out who the customers are, and if you can describe who they are on one sheet of paper, you're on track. Now, product differentiation is the other trick, is effectively the opposite of market segmentation. If market segmentation is about splitting up your customers, product differentiation is about splitting up your products. Splitting up your products in a way that it will actually meet specific customers' needs. So remember I said, like, you do value proposition canvas, and if you do it for different customer segments, they will be looking at slightly different pains and slightly different gains, and you'll have to provide slightly different pain relievers and gain creators. And again, through through product differentiation, you can actually offer products that, whilst the core technology might be related or relatively similar, the products themselves will be targeted towards a market. I've got a non-space example here. There's actually a very famous company in Scotland who's been using a special kind of sort of anaerobic digestion process in bacteria and algae to use discards from whiskey distilling and to make sort of very rich, nutritious sort of soup, if you like, or it's like a gooish sort of substance, right? And they've, as with the health market booming, they thought, well, this is going to be amazing. There'll be people who want to eat it. And of course, they realized several things. One is that it's very difficult to get to the healthcare markets because there's lots of regulation if you want people to actually eat your product. And on the other side of things, it doesn't taste great, so they have to mix it into things. It becomes very, very difficult. So they've realized that, yes, they still want to pursue that as a future product, but they can differentiate their product. They can pivot a little bit. Pivots are often opportunities or sometimes people refer to as a pivot, as effective as a product differentiation step. You change your product to target a different market segment because you realize that market segment is more valuable than otherwise. But what you do with the product differentiation is that they've actually decided, why would you sell this to humans? You can sell this to pets. And so they've created a dietary supplement for pets, which is flying off the shelves, and the company's been growing to a multi-million company in the space of 4 years. But what their actual product ended up being is pet food, right? So this sort of kind of this is a slightly whimsical, slightly out there example of how how you can actually create new ways of doing things, but without changing the core technology much. You can change the way your product looks and feels and works on a level in order for that to meet your market needs. Now, there's a little caveat here. This works a lot better if you're doing consumer products than if you're doing business to business. So when you are doing business to business, the core step is to understand how your purchaser, how your customer actually values the product. And you will have to adapt to their thinking, because they, more often than not, if you talk about sort of government procurement, or if you talk about B2B business deals, what they'll be looking for is a particular functionality. So there's no, the tinkering really isn't around, what kind of packaging you put around or etc. It will have to be more responsive to the market demands. But often enough, there's actually ways in which you can exploit different ways in which different customers might value something that your product or service is able to do, in order to offer either multiple offerings or need to pivot and switch over to a more profitable market stream. This is this is just this is a very, very short overview of everything. We'd like to do some practical exercise now. Before we do that, I've seen some already kind of comment in the chat saying, well, this is super difficult. I mean, this actually takes time, it takes resources, and you kind of have two ways to do it. First one is what Richard asked earlier, which is hands up if you have somebody inside the company who is looking after market tracking and market research all the time. The other way to do it, which Richard I'm sure is going to introduce now, is actually you can be supported in doing so, right? And it's not just in the work that like a workshop like this, but people like Astro Agency, etc., specialize in developing solutions for companies. So I think Richard's got another slide that actually says a little bit about the way in which you can actually do market analysis and then corresponding segmentation and potentially for differentiation.
Sorry, I was just turning my microphone off mute. Yeah, this is a much shorter slide in terms of talking about it than the others we've just been through. I can't emphasize enough how important the market research and due diligence is. It will save you a lot of pain, and it will save you a lot of money potentially if you do it from the outset, if you get into the habit of doing it. But very, very good questions that what if you can't do that, if you can't justify putting someone full-time looking into this? And that is where the external option comes in, and there are plenty of companies out there who can support this, not just ourselves at Astro Agency, but you've got companies like Bryce, NSR, Euroconsult, Bain, and so on. Now, costs vary. It depends on how much detail you want to go into, but then that has to be weighed up with how important it is for you to get your strategy right. And often it's the case that getting that market research done or due diligence early on is very, very useful to ensure that you have a long-term strategy that's consistent and that will make you money. Because the bottom line is, when you're running a business, you are there to make money, and you need to keep that in mind. It's very easy in the space industry to get carried away with the romance of the fact that you might be building a satellite, building a launch vehicle, or developing an innovative data application. However, it's got to make money for you to be able to keep a roof over your head. So you need to bear that in mind. That's really, really important. Don't forget, you've got to eat. I'll pass back over to Matt at this point, if I may.
We are ready to do the exercises. So this completes the kind of the introduction. And the whole purpose of this workshop is not for us to just kind of throw a lot of information at you, but to assist you in actually applying some concrete tools in order to understand better your market position and how you should prioritize where you're going in your market. So the plan first is to have a look at a relatively simple SWOT. I'm sure you're all familiar with SWOT analysis, and SWOT analysis can be operated on any sort of scale. You can do a SWOT analysis of your technology or any technology. You can do a SWOT analysis of a particular product or a business model or a market or a sector. So if you all would like to consider, so in order for us to actually have a meaningful conversation about your market and your market prioritization, we'll do a super quick short SWOT analysis. We're going to break out into rooms, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to provide the main strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat in your market. Now, remember the way SWOT analysis works. Well, strength, what is harmful, what's helpful. I think, the difference between strengths, opportunities, and weakness and threats, I don't think you have to explain. That's quite, there's one positive, one negative. But it is important. The other two dimensions are important. So strengths and weaknesses operate internally. So effectively are things you have control over. And opportunities and threats are things you don't have control over. So if you think about yourself and your market, can you list the major strength for your company in this market and its major weakness, its major opportunity for your company, and the major threat to your company, to the position that you have in this market? So we're going to do a very super quick breakout rooms. We didn't distribute any materials, but you can draw your own quadrant, SWOT quadrant on a piece of paper. And we'll try and in groups sort of report. I think we'll just break into two groups, right? How many people we got? Oh, we have 30 people on the call. So that's a few groups.
Hi, Matt. I've got 5 rooms ready to go, just to kind of make sure everybody gets a chance to actually describe the SWOT analysis.
Excellent, perfect. Right. So let's break out into the 5 rooms. We'll take another 2 or 3 minutes for people to think through their SWOTs. And then if they'll report back into the rooms, one of us should be in each room. Is that going to work out? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is me, Ben, Hussein.
Yeah, so let's do.
Well, so yeah, we can record this or not necessarily. This is still the exercise. So the critical thing about a position in the market and understanding how you prioritize your market is understanding your relationship with other potential competitors. So importantly, markets aren't vacuums where you just live in completely outside of the sort of relationships you have. It is in fact entirely constructed in relation to your competitors. And if you flip the SWOT on its head and say like, okay, so what are my kind of, what are the qualities that I would like to compare myself with the competitors on that are based on what my users want, right? So first we need to understand a little bit as to what users want, which in your case, if you look it back to SWOT, is like, what is the opportunity? What are the dimensions of that opportunity? And then how do I position myself against competitors on those dimensions? Now, a traditional SWOT is usually based on kind of deliverability versus how big the disruption is, right? And then you have this sort of description of, challengers, leaders, niche players, visionaries, right? And you can kind of put yourself and also move that dot. And there's a whole science of dotology as to how you move the dots in analysts or indeed customers' minds in order to position yourself more favorably against the competition. But another way to think about this, and another little exercise we're going to do now, is to draw that diagram. Think about what would be the axis of what your users, your customers want the most from the technological field that you are trying to enter. And then try and place yourself and one or two or three competitors. Of course, you can do this properly later on as a bit of homework if you like. You can map all the competitors that you're aware of on this graph, but try and place them. Try and make an assessment as to how well they are meeting your users' needs according to the axes that you feel are relevant. Hopefully based on some market research, but if not, you can just sort of think a little bit as to what might be things that your products are satisfying. Okay, so another sometimes referred to as technology development curve. So most technologies, most product services, new offerings to the market will follow this idea of a kind of a hype cycle. It starts off by people going like, oh, wow, this is the best thing since sliced bread, right? And we're just going to have loads of various possible applications and everybody's super excited. And the number of offerings grows, the number of expectations of what a new technology or service or product can provide will grow. At some point, reality will hit, right? The early stage R&D money is going to be spent and some of the doors will be closing. And then there'll come the trough of disillusionment. It's literally called like that. It basically is the decline. As you start closing down, you basically say, well, clearly we can't do X, Y, Z, etc. And then at some point that will actually curve upwards again, where you say, well, okay, so now that we understand what the product can do, we are coming to a much more realistic position as to what is actually in this product. And of course, remember, this is all about the value. So what is the actual value? What's the realistic expectation of what something can actually deliver? And that's called the slope of enlightenment. So they all have very nice names. These were all, by the way, developed by an analyst company, a tech analyst company called Gartner, and sometimes referred to as the Gartner hype cycle. You can find actually Gartner cycles published. So they do these sort of big technological domain overviews. This one is for just all emerging technologies for 2019. They publish one every single year as an update. And you can kind of see, perhaps you'll recognize some of your own technology on that hype curve. Because they're talking about emerging technology, most of them will be on this sort of upward slope of going up, sort of the beginning of the trajectory. But if you look more specifically for things like AI, or if you look for, I don't think they publish one on space specifically, but they do publish lots of sort of IT, because IT analysts is what a lot of money in Gartner is made. You can try and find some of your technologies in these various hype cycles, and you will understand a little bit that what your market is telling you right now about technology might either be overinflated if you're at the expectations going up sort of part of the curve. Indeed, it could be also underestimated. Clever investors are looking for technologies that have just surpassed the peak, because technologies just surpassed the peak means that a lot of the investors that are there to just make a lot of money or a little bit more naive about the technology, they'll start exiting. They'll be like, okay, clearly this isn't actually delivering on what we've been promised. There's a lot of R&D has been done, but they're not going to necessarily stick around to see it come to fruition. People get spooked. So a lot of clever investors are actually going to go for graph analytics. We'll go for graph analytics in 2020. Now, maybe not have worked out. There's no guarantees there. But one of the things that you need to understand is maybe the market is actually undervaluing your technology, and it's important to appreciate that and respond to it. And then once you're kind of towards the slope on enlightenment, you don't need this graph anymore, because your expectations and reality will get increasingly closer, because you'll be increasingly closer to actually delivering your product or service to the market, and the market will be much better informed about that technology is. So the difference between the value that you feel your technology has and the market ascribes to your technology will be much more aligned. But it enables you, remember about prioritization, it enables you, particularly because these curves, right, can be written up for different markets and for different technologies, and you can spot the same technology at different positions of the curve in different markets. And remember, this course is all about, this workshop is all about market prioritization. So what you need to do is you need to look for a place where your technology matches its valuation in a way that's favorable to you, right? If you're looking for early stage investment, if you're looking for people to write you blank checks, then you should look for markets where your technology will be placed in the early part of that curve, where there's a lot of expectation, lots of excitement, a lot of hype about it, because that creates hyperinflated value of your technology, and people will put money down and will let you do your R&D irrespective of how exact your valuation is. If you are looking for, purchasing something, right? If you're looking for getting some technology into your company, if you're thinking about mini acquisition because you need something new, you need to look for, is that technology in a particular market on that trough of disillusionment? Is somebody trying to exit from that technology? Because you can pick up something on the cheap, right? And once you are actually trying to get closer to the market, you need to understand, are you actually starting to climb that slope of enlightenment? Is your market, because this is the thing that was mentioned, Richard mentioned, sometimes you can go maybe too early, you can go too late, there's that kind of temporal sweet spot you need to hit. The best sweet spot to need to hit when you are actually introducing a technology is right when it turns from trough of disillusionment into the slope of enlightenment, because that is the point at which the value of the expectations are a little bit lower there where the actual value is, but you can actually capitalize on that because you can do the product differentiation, tap into different aspects of the market, and build that expectation from different bits. And it's usually the sweet spot where new technology gets introduced. So you need to understand a little bit where you're on this curve, both in terms of not just yourself, but also your competitors potentially, because if somebody's a little bit ahead, that's a worry. You need to think about, okay, so how do we make sure that they don't become an incumbent before we are on the market? And indeed, as I say, there's strategies we can actually use hype cycles in order to benefit your company, both in terms of investment as well as in terms of acquiring complementary technologies, etc. Homework, though. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into another breakout room and actually do this. In fact, I need to apologize profusely for having overrun. It is the first workshop that we've done as this team. So we'll learn. We promise next time we'll be closer to time, or indeed we'll extend the Zoom slot for another 15 minutes for sure, because even by cutting down, I think we'll be struggling to get as much in as we'd like, primarily because we would like to spend as much time as possible talking to you with the exercises, with the work that we've done in the last half an hour. And as much as we'll try to cut the initial introduction, we also need to give you some of the points as to what's going on. So anyways, thank you so much, everybody, for taking part. And I'll hand over to Hussein and then the Entrepreneurial Spark team to lead us out of this workshop.
Excellent. Well, we hope that you had a productive and a wishful session. We have 2 more workshops scheduled that are coming up in 2 weeks' time, and you can reach out to us. There's an email address just on the bottom there if you have any questions or anything comes up. In the meantime, however, I'll pass it over to Catherine. She might have something to close this off, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Hussein. So I'll be fairly brief because I know we are over time. But initially, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone at Astro Agency, anyone that's been involved with the delivery of the workshop today. There's a number of individuals on this workshop which I'm sure will have benefited from it, and we appreciate the ongoing partnership and support from you guys. So yeah, just a very big thank you from us. Secondly, in terms of next steps, for the LEOs, the Astro Agency are extending an offer of one-to-one support, and this will be released on the announcements shortly. So just keep an eye out on the work pilot announcement. Something will be coming your way. As Hussein has mentioned, this is workshop number 1 of 3. The next one is in 2 weeks. Again, will be on the announcements, the events. For the Explore individuals, we will send the details of the workshop onto you so that you don't miss out. Yeah, just lastly, big thank you to Astro Agency, and that's it from all of us today.